Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 878, an act relating to criminal justice. The message is signed Joanne M. Zoff, Secretary of the Senate. And the report is addressed to the Honorable Sandra L. Pappas, President of the Senate, the Honorable Kurt L. Doudt, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File Number 878, report that we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommended as follows. And the conference report is signed by 4 of the 5 members of the Senate and 5 of the 5 members on behalf of the House. Cornish moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 878 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
The gentleman from Blue Earth, Chairman Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, this is Senate File 878, the Public Safety Judiciary Crime Prevention Policy and Finance Bill. What I'll do is, wow, there's not many people here. What I'll do is run through the policy first, and I'm just going to give you the headings and a brief description, and we can get into the weeds on this as much as you want. I'll run through it policy, then I'll go through the budget sheet, and anything that you got questions on. If I don't know it, I'll get my fiscal analyst here. First of all, on the policy issues, termination of, I'll give you what we had to give up in conference and then the policy that was added. So in my presentation today to you folks, all I'm going to really do is give you the changes as it left the floor. Now when they presented this over in the Senate, they went through the whole entire bill. We've already done that, so I'll just give you the changes. First of all, the termination of parental rights for rape. We lost prejudgment interest. We lost new crime for consensual videos in locker rooms and restrooms. We gave up mandatory sentences for assaults and inmates. What we did was we lost a portion for mandatory sentences, but we kept the raising of the enhancement of the penalty for assaulting a worker at St. Peter. Also lost was the crime for impersonating a member of the military, criminal defamation, utility co-ops for disaster aid assistance, criminal vehicular homicide penalties, the new arson offense, and the sex offender registration provision of the sex trafficking bill. Now it seems like we lost a lot here, but we actually kept a lot of the important policy that we had. The policy that was added was we kept naturally all of the gun issues in there, and we added one from the Senate that the people that had the gun issues were okay with. What it did is an enhanced penalty that if you're using a suppressor while you're hunting and commit a violation in the possession of a suppressor, it would be an enhanced penalty. Also, there was language about a bondsman, the vehicle color and uniform color. As you know, in Chapter 626, under the peace officer definitions and how they operate, they've got a distinctive uniform color, and so that the probation in all the different areas of law enforcement have this, but they didn't have one for bondsmen to distinguish them from law enforcement, so that was in there. Straw purchases of firearms. The feds already have this. If you purchase a firearm for another, you can't do that. It's a stiff penalty, but we didn't have one specifically for the state, and that one you remember where a person bought a firearm for another, and the only thing that they had was a federal charge and not a state. So if the federal prosecutor failed to charge them, this allows the state to bring their charges. The general default penalty reduced to a petty misdemeanor. We took that. A safe at home address confidential program and the discharge of judgment fees. I think that was that the Franzen bill? So that was the policy changes. Now in the budget, what we did is we went to the governor's. The governor got his request in a new target of 4 and 4 for the judges and staff, and I think 11.4 million for the BCA. That was the two big things that the governor got. So the people that wanted to see the judges get and staff get a bigger compensation, that was I think we started out at 1.5. It's up to 4 and 4. The same thing with the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, District Court. Tax court, we had the judges were 4 and 4. We got some mandated info technology services and a third law clerk. The Public Defense Board, since they went up, I think they had requested 41 or something like that attorneys, and we started out about half of that, or 20.5. We ended up at 38 new public defenders in the Public Defense Board. The Public Safety, Homeland Security, we have them 1.8 salary like the others, but we have that money in there for the anti-ISIS, the El Shabaab recruitment, $250,000 each year. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, where they went up, was $11.4 million, the full governor request, and additional crime fighting, supplies and equipment, live scan replacement, a number of issues where they went up in. Fire marshal, a lot of you are concerned about the fire safety account. They did borrow money from that, but as different in the past, it's going to be paid back and replenished or backfilled, so they're not going to lose any money. And the fire safety folks met me afterwards, and they're okay with that. The Office of Justice Programs, there was quite a bit of money that went into that. Some of you have expressed concern about youth and prevention, YIPA. That is up to 1.5 million, 1.3 million crime victims, 800,000 into the child advocacy centers that we talked about. I think that was a Brian Johnson bill. 200,000 into prosecutor training. 500,000 in sex traffic prevention, 600,000 juvenile detention alternatives, 300,000 in crime victim suicide support line, 80,000 in the lost and wandering, where there was lifesaver lost and wandering grants that people were talked about, and 200,000 advocate for family peace, a domestic abuse shelter. So you folks that thought we didn't get enough as it left for the OJP, Office of Justice Programs, we went up quite a bit. The Post Board, for some of you that know the Post Board or care deeply about it, the Peace Officer Standards of Training, we haven't given them an increase, a regular increase, and I don't know how long. So we were successful in getting them a $250,000 operating increase. And that's where $200,000 went in for the training for crisis de-escalation. The Private Detective Board, the Senate had felt bad for the Private Detective Board and gave them an administrative assistant because they were overworked, so they have one new staff person. The Human Rights Department, we came up to 2 new staff positions. Corrections, they didn't fare so well as the other departments, but we did get some money to them, and we gave them, I believe, about full funding for their fugitive apprehension task force. That's the one I had talked about. And then the doulas, some of you folks that wanted the doulas into the corrections in the county jails, we put I think 60,000 in there for doulas, and I didn't even know what they were until this turned up. The community services operating costs, well, we put 9.8 million in that into state and county probation agents, and that's about it. We got another sheet here. One thing that I forgot to do before, and I'd like to thank my conferees, Deb Hillstrom, Brian Johnson, Jerry Hertaz, and Kathy Lomer. Everything went well. We closed it up. When we did it last night, the Senate argued more than amongst themselves than anybody else did. And all in all, it was a good bill. And a lot of you folks had some reservations, and not even a lot. There was a few that fell off the grid when it left here because we didn't have enough money in it for certain categories, YIPA and OJP. So I'm hoping that we'll pick up a few more votes as it leaves today, and I'll stand for any questions.
Discussion. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I want to comment about a couple aspects of the bill. I want to thank the chair and the conference committee for a number of aspects of this. There's some really important funding in here for programs that I'm familiar with in my work as a prosecutor. I'm especially pleased about the funding to public defenders, to the youth intervention programs, and the crime victim services. This is really important work that these groups do throughout the state, and it's really good that the funding that we had leaving the floor here in the House has gone up even further. And I'm very pleased, and I didn't talk too much about this earlier, but I want to point out to folks that we really are kind of at a historic moment in the area of investigating sex trafficking. This bill will have grants totaling $500,000 over the biennium to multi-jurisdictional efforts to fight trafficking. Many of you are aware of these efforts that have gone on in your own communities. There are individual law enforcement agencies that have contacted you, some letters that I forwarded regarding that. And this is really important, and this is work that really is connecting our safe harbor work that we've done for getting some services and support for victims, having that gap be filled in where we're going after traffickers and identifying the victims through law enforcement as well. So I appreciate that work. Having said that, there is one really glaring gap in the bill that's of deep concern to me and to many others as well, and that relates to the idea of restoring the vote for folks who have been convicted of felonies. Members, I have prosecuted many cases that have sent people to prison. And in every one of the cases that I prosecuted, those people will be getting out of prison. They either have gotten out or someday they'll be getting out. When they do, it is crucial that those individuals be able to rejoin society, because we need every single hand on deck. We need everybody to be a part of this. There's been tremendous effort that's happened throughout our country, really, to unite progressive forces, conservative forces, and others to recognize that there is a perspective that is right on crime, I think is the term been used on the conservative side, and recognizing that we need to be smart about our public safety spending and smart about how we handle public safety. Allowing people who have been convicted of crimes after they've served their time in custody to be able to rejoin society, to be able to vote, is absolutely part of that effort. It's so important that these individuals be part of our society. And it is deeply disappointing that and it's my understanding at the House leadership level that this has been something that has been kept out of the bill, and that instead we do have some policy provisions in here relating to firearms and other things. I'm really concerned about that, members, and to my mind, this is something that is a civil rights issue that is absolutely crucial. I think 49,000 Minnesotans are currently disenfranchised, many of them outside the metro area, in fact, all throughout our state and every one of our districts. So I hope that in the future, this is something that we'll be moving towards and making sure that every one of these individuals has the right to vote. So I will be voting in favor of the bill. I think there's a number of really good investments being made here, and I appreciate the work, but I am disappointed in the lack of making sure that those folks who served their time are not set up to rejoin our community right away and participate in our democracy. Mr. Speaker, members, thank you.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Hertas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Pinto, thank you for those generally kind words about the work that we did in the Public Safety Committee. Representative Hillstrom, I want to especially thank for a lot of very helpful insights into the workings of a conference committee, and I thank you with much respect for the contributions that you made. And Chair Cornish and other members on our conference committee, I think we got a really good deal. I'd like to point out also that with the raised targets that were available after they were adjusted and announced, we were able to allocate funds in areas that are important to all of us in the areas of public safety, the public defenders, as well as the good work that the Youth Intervention Program Association does for helping prevent youth from becoming problems in the judicial system and keeping them on the straight and narrow and offering opportunities to lift themselves out of poverty as well. So with that, the last comment I'd like to say is thank you to everybody for all your work in helping me have Colton's Law included in this. The family, John and Julie Gleason, thank the members very much for inclusion of this change that will help make sure that those who are incarcerated and released to supervised release or intensive supervised release have that transition in a seamless way and not have a vacation in the middle of that. Members, the Senate just passed the Omnibus Public Safety Bill over there just a few minutes ago, so I look forward to a green vote from all of you. Thank you.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Dean R.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And there are a lot of good things in this bill. But I'm going to speak to the issue that there's provision not included in this bill, and that is the restoration of voting rights for individuals that are currently out in public, living in your communities, riding the bus with your grandmother, and these are individuals that we currently restrict the right to vote. There are over 47,000 individuals in Minnesota right now that can't vote. 47,000. That's more than the people that live in your district. So it's as if we're taking more than a district and then some, and we're saying you don't count. You're not part of the state. You know, there's lots of talks on the issue of the sentence, when it's done. So a quick little history lesson. In 1860, there were 75 crimes that were considered felonies. There was no probation. And the number of people that were under corrections at that time, which would have been locked up away from public, was like less than 0.02% of the people in Minnesota. Today, we have 368 felonies that people can be convicted of, which takes away their right to vote. And 75,000 of the people currently in place are under probation. That's 1.5% of the people in Minnesota that can't vote as a result of what some people would say were youthful indiscretion or something of that nature. When I speak to groups, I ask people in the room that if they're ever been convicted of a felony to please stand up. Usually it's about 7 to 12% of the people in the room that stand up. And then I ask a follow-up question. How many of you did things when you were young that if you got caught, you would have had a felony? And it's inevitable that 90% of the room stands up. So clearly, this is not an issue of what people are doing right or wrong. It's often an issue of, did they get caught doing what they were doing when they were young? And I see Representative Gruenhagen over there chuckling. I'm guessing he did some things when he was young that if he would have got caught, he might have had a felony. 13 states that currently allow, well, and probably even Representative Zerwas as well. But 13 states, and these include really conservative states like Indiana, Montana, North Dakota, and Utah. They allow individuals who are out in public, who are out functioning every day, who are out paying taxes, who are out working and raising their kids, they allow them to vote. I think we should move forward and become a state that also allows those individual votes. For the past couple of years, many people have been working hard to try to get this legislation to move forward. And let me take a moment to thank all the advocates that have worked tirelessly to try to make this happen. They have worked very, very hard these past several weeks to try to change some minds, and I think we actually have changed some minds. A couple of years ago when I carried this bill, there was only, I think, 1 or 2 GOP members that have signed on to it. This year, the bill to restore the right to vote was carried by Chair Cornish, and I want to thank him for that. And I have no doubt that you actually believe that this is the right thing to do. And there was roughly, I think at one time, 13 Republican legislators that had signed on to it. As we've got to the point where we are today, there are currently only 8. So some of you have either changed your mind because you think it's now the wrong thing to do, or you have taken some instructions from leadership to say this isn't a good bill for you. This is a good bill for everybody. Restoring the right to vote allows individuals to participate completely in society. Peace officers have said that this is one of the things that have individuals do really good things out in the community and engage them and engage their communities. There's no evidence that restoring an individual's right to vote does anything to prevent future crimes. No evidence that this does anything to improve public safety. So in many ways, if this is something that you support it because you think it's important that people are punished for what they have done, not because you want them to be good individuals. We've had many groups that have been supportive of reenfranchising voters in Minnesota, and I want to take a moment to name a few of them. The Conflict Resolution Center of Minnesota, the Minnesota Corrections Association, the Minnesota County Attorneys Association, the Minnesota Catholic Conference, the Minnesota Council of Churches, Minnesota Adult and Teens Challenge, the Advocates for Human Rights, Children's Defense Fund of Minnesota, the League of Women Voters, Liberty Minnesota, the Minnesota Second Chance Coalition, People for the American Way, and the Republican Liberty Caucus of Minnesota, who, by the way, have said that this is tantamount to individuals having no representation but having to pay taxes. So this is something that I think is really critical to understand. Now, I want to take a moment and just tell a couple of you how many individuals are disenfranchised within your districts. So for instance, the gentleman to my right here, he has parts of Itasca and Cass County. He has over 1,000 people in his district that are disenfranchised from voting. In Carlton County, 316 people are disenfranchised from voting. In Lyon County, which is Representative Swedzinski's district, 308 individuals are disenfranchised from voting. In Clay County, 981 individuals are disenfranchised. Washington County, 1,933 individuals. In Wright County, 1,151. And out in Roseau, Minnesota, in Roseau County, 218. And in my good friend Representative David's counties in Fillmore and Houston, there are a total of 373 people that are currently disenfranchised from voting. So these are people that are in our districts. They're not just individuals we don't know. Right now in Minnesota, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 individuals currently has a criminal record. So that means that chances are you know somebody, or you know someone whose kids has a criminal record, and you probably say to yourself, well, you know, little Johnny, he's a good kid, he made a mistake. Well, generally, a lot of these people, that's the case. They're good people that made mistakes when they were young, made bad choices, and are trying to turn their lives around. And I'm going to tell this body that we did something really important a couple of years ago. And we passed legislation that was ban the box, that would allow those individuals the opportunity to actually get access to an interview in applying for a job. Because most of them were shut out from the initial application on the ability to even get an interview and talk about how their life was different today than it may have been 15 years ago or farther. So I'm really confused in many ways why leadership has decided not to allow this to move forward. And I don't say that lightly. The move in the country, and actually in conservative realms, is to move forward and allow individuals the right to vote and get them to become fully participating members in societies. And that includes individuals like Dick Durbin and Lindsey Graham, who believe that people should have second chances. And even conservative billionaires like Charles and David Koch believe that individuals should have a right to vote when they are out in the public. So this isn't just a liberal issue. This is truly an issue that is no longer a partisan issue, and I think we need to be thinking about it this way. So it's time for us, many of us, to get into the 21st century. It's not 1960 anymore, and there's no doubt that a lot of the individuals, like the several members who are still co-authors on this bill, truly believe that this is the right thing to do, and I trust that you truly believe that. But there's some troglodytes out there. Troglodytes who still live in the 1960s and think that the world is the same as it was 50-some years ago. If you don't know, in just over 30 years, Minnesota will be a majority the people of color. So white people will no longer be the majority of people in the state like we currently are. And we'll be outnumbered. And some people are a little bit freaked out by that. But just let me say, I'm someone that lives in a diverse community, very diverse, quite frankly, and there's nothing to be afraid of. They're just like you and me and your constituents. They want to get up every day. They want to make sure their kids have a good education. They work hard. They try to aspire to be more than what they are, like all of us aspire to be more than what they are. And they want to make the world a better place. Now, we can talk a lot about the numbers. I think most folks, if you ask them, maybe even in this body, how many people that are out there on probation are people of color? My guess is that people would probably say 60, maybe 70% are people of color. Well, actually, it's the opposite way. 64% of the people that are currently under supervision in the state of Minnesota and that are disenfranchised are white people like me and many of you. And most people also say that, well, this is an urban issue. These are people that live in the city. That's not true. 64% of the people that are currently under supervision live outside Hennepin and Ramsey County. So, members, I'm really, really disappointed that this was not included in the final draft of the conference committee. I know that the Senate has worked really, really hard to try to move this forward, and I will say that I'm a bit dismayed that the GOP majority and leadership has decided that they were not going to allow this to move forward this year. And if there's one thing that I can say, I hope that in 2017 we have a majority in this House that believes that this is the right thing to do and we pass this. So I'll be voting no. I hope that many of you will too as well. Thank you.
Gentleman from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Chair Cornish yield to a couple questions?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chair Cornish, could you just refresh a memory for the body why we needed to shift money from the fire safety account, and then that's $2.5 million and $2 million from MinCorp. What's that going to do? Why we needed to shift it, and how the plan is to make sure that that's repaid.
Gentleman from Blue Earth, Chair Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Schoen, I guess the reason it was is that they just wanted to fund more projects, and they had different needs than we did, and we came in low and they came in high, and they wouldn't come down from their needs, and we had to get the bill done. And I had extensive conversation with the fire safety lobbyists all before the process, when we kind of sensed that might happen, because we knew what their proposal was before we went in there. And we've got basically, they would have rather had our language. We got their blessing that we could do this because they get paid back. And we still got some work to do in the future, but we fixed it up so we don't meddle with it nearly as much, and made it easier for them to appropriate with the language we put with it. So they should be okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and Representative Cornish, thank you for that explanation. And I know that, I mean, we obviously sit with a pretty good fund balance in the general fund after the last couple of years, and it doesn't appear that now we're going to get much in the way of a tax bill or other things that are going to happen here at the legislature this year, unfortunately. What's disappointing, I mean, and I don't know where the governor is going to fall on this, because the governor has made statements publicly that, hey, I'll support your suppressors in the bill, but if you didn't do felon voting, then he's going to veto the bill. So this is kind of a conundrum for many of us that would, you know, I supported all the gun bills that went in this year, or this, and simply off of that basis, well, we'll get the deal done, we'll get it figured out. And the governor said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do felon voting, or restoration of voting rights, as Representative Dean R. pointed out, that, you know, in my county alone, that's nearly 2,000 people. And I think I heard the statistic earlier that 64% of the Minnesotans that could have their voting rights reinstated live outside of Hennepin and Ramsey County. So again, that's a significant number. And there are some things that we didn't do in this bill related to the DWI task force recommendations. And you know, that actually has been kind of troublesome over the last couple of years, because there were recommendations related to ignition interlock that went immediately political, and people were attacked on that. And now, look at us today. It's an issue that we can't even bring up. Our members were attacked on ignition interlock during the campaign, and Representative Hertas brought a bill to committee on ignition interlock. Now, I happen to agree with Representative Hertas that those are the right measures, because, heck, if they have to breathe into a tube to get the car started, we're going to have less people driving drunk on the road. That's the only way to do it. That's a guarantee, unless you have a partner there to take care of the breathing for you. But unfortunately, you know, the reality is it's political now. So I don't know when we're going to get those things done. I hope we do. Seems that we had more people on some other bills that were going to be more supportive in this body that used to be more political. And now they aren't quite as political, but yet they're still political. And, you know, I'll be supporting this bill today with the caveat that, you know, I kind of think that Governor Dayton should stand by his statement in the media that if he wanted the suppressors in the bill, then he wanted restoration of voting rights for all those Minnesotans. And I can promise you right now, if he vetoes the bill, you won't have my vote to override his veto. There's a lot of good things in this bill, because we do work together on this a lot. But there's a couple points that are problematic for me and the citizens I serve.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Cornish yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Cornish, I thought I had seen in the press or on Twitter or something earlier today that changes had been made very recently in the suppressor language that's in the bill. And I just wanted to ask you about that. I'm sorry, when you started presenting the bill, I was in the retiring room and came in and didn't get to hear whether you covered that, so I apologize if you did. But I wonder if you could just kind of go through with us briefly what kind of gun language is in here. I'm particularly interested in the suppressor language and whether that is still the language that the governor has expressed concern about.
The gentleman from Blue Earth, Chair Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Liebling, I'll give you a real quick dissertation on that. First of all, just so everybody knows, it was said in the Senate side that law enforcement is against suppressors. That's a broad statement. It's like saying you have a bipartisan vote when only one from the other party votes. Only one group sent us, the chiefs of police sent us a weak letter saying they had concerns. We didn't hear from any other law enforcement showing up or letters or testifying. So one group gave rather a weak letter. The changes in the, also 39 states allow suppressors. I had my researcher call over 10 of the states that do. They say they're completely non-issue. They're not used in crime. If somebody steals them from a house, they don't turn back up in crime. They're not a threat to law enforcement anywhere where you could find. We don't know what the problem is. It was like we tried to take the word scary out of LPRs. I wish we could do the same because there's no empirical evidence whatsoever that they're a danger to the public or law enforcement. Now, having said all of that, the only change that I know of that's made in the suppressor bill from the start is one change that was offered by the Senate, and the DNR came to them with a suggestion that if you're in possession of a suppressor while you commit a violation, there should be an enhancement. So that's the only change. It's an additional protection or whatever you would call it for the people that aren't comfortable with suppressors. If you hunt with them and commit a hunting violation, it's an additional penalty. That's the only change that I know of since this bill originated in the committee process.
Representative Liebling.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Cornish. I wasn't really asking for a great defense of the provisions so much as I was just about the changes, and I think I understood you to say that there are these enhanced penalties in there for using a suppressor in a crime. Okay, well, that's good to know that that hasn't changed. So I'm assuming that this is still the language that the governor had problems with. I mean, we've had a lot of debates here on the House floor about gun policy, and I think people often have pretty firm positions, and I'm not asking to reopen that right now and re-argue it. I'm just simply trying to understand what's in this conference report, because things are moving pretty quickly here, and I haven't had a full opportunity to really read the bill, and I don't know how many members have who aren't on the committee. So just trying to understand what's going to be voted on here this evening. So would Representative Cornish yield again?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Cornish, I just kind of want to know which gun provisions are in the bill. Just, you know, again, not to debate them here again, but just so that we all understand what it is that's in here that we'll be voting on in a few minutes. Thank you.
Chair Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, there's another one in reciprocity right now. If you want to carry a handgun in another state, the law states that our laws their law concerning permits has to be substantially similar. In this one, we remove the word substantially and leave similar in the reciprocity agreements that allows the DPS commissioner to look at each state's laws versus our laws. They still have trump power. They can say, no, it's not even similar, and still restrict somebody from another state in carrying Minnesota, but it strikes the word substantially, so it gives them a little more room. It's like the difference between identical and similar. It gives them a little more area to interpret it. Another one is the emergency powers. If a state of emergency is declared in Minnesota, basically it says you can't take the gun if you can't take the person. In Katrina, the law enforcement floated around in boats and jerked guns out of houses without warrants. This would prohibit that. If a disaster is declared, a state of disaster has to be declared, first of all, but then law enforcement can't take the weapons without some judicial document or warrant, or if they take the person into custody on a medical hold, they could do that until they're released by a psychiatrist or something like that. But you can't take the person, basically, or the gun if you can't take the person. They have to have a reason. And another one. Huh? Come out, number. Oh, yeah, and then the, excuse me, Representative Liebling, the capital carry. What we've done is gone from a notification in paper, and if one of the troopers outside the door saw somebody with a handgun and they wanted to check on their permit, under the system we have now, kind of a lame system that's been in effect for years, you have to put something in writing or email. The security takes it out, prints it out, puts it in a 3-ring binder with 700 and some other things, and so they would have to call over. Now we put a number, I can't remember how many $1 million into a database previously to address this. So now all of your, once you're successfully issued a handgun permit to carry, you go into that database. So all they have to do is get on their phone and get onto the computer somewhere, and boom, they check. So we've deleted the requirement that you have to notify them in paper. Now, if under this proposal, as soon as you're issued a permit, it goes right into the database and they can check on it. So that's, and by the way, security here testified in support of it, the Capitol. It'd be easier for them, actually.
The member from Washington, Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just wanted to rise in support of this bill, and I want to first of all thank Representative and Chair Cornish for his great work on this bill, and it was an honor to be part of the conference committee. I learned an awful lot, and I want to thank everyone who was on the conference committee, and I know it's already been mentioned, but Representative Hillstrom was a great help on the committee. A lot has already been mentioned on the good provisions in this bill, but one that really kind of jumps out to me is the one where we are supporting the crime suicide survivors, a portion of the bill, and funding that was really important. We heard some incredibly sad and moving testimony from folks in our committee whose loved one was a suicide victim, a murder-suicide victim, or something like that, and what these folks go through in the grieving process is just very, very difficult. And the folks that work with these people, it's a very specialized type of person that's able to do this. So I'm just really grateful that we were able to fund that, and the sex trafficking prevention grants. I mean, there's just some really, really excellent things in this bill, and so I would urge members to all vote green. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, as you know, the public safety bill carries all the funding for the third branch of government, and we all know that we have a real responsibility to do bipartisan work to ensure public safety for all Minnesotans. So members, I want to tell you that this bill goes a really long way to not only fund our third branch of government, the courts, but to make the opportunity and take the opportunity to invest in our youth, to make certain that they don't end up in the criminal justice system. It goes above and beyond in training both prosecutors and law enforcement and the public defenders to make certain that we have adequate training about the best way to deal with all of the folks who end up going through our criminal justice system. Members, we started off with a target that was approximately $30 million below the Senate's target, $35 million below the Senate's target. And by the time we were done, we were able to invest in almost everything that we felt was important. So I don't think that the funding portion of this bill is controversial at all. It includes the ISIS prevention recruitment grants. It includes grants to help prevent sex trafficking. It has grants for de-escalation training of law enforcement. We did lose some of the policy provisions that came off this floor, which is unfortunate that that happened, but we did pick up some important pieces there as well. We were successful in adding additional court funding for specialty courts. So whether you have a veterans court or whether you have a DWI court or a drug court, we were able to add additional funding to that. And we know that folks who participate in those kinds of programming are less likely to end up back in the criminal justice system. We were able to add additional supervision. So we invested in corrections officers and intensive supervised release to your local communities so that we can make certain that people who are out are being supervised. Minnesota incarcerates the 49th lowest number of folks in the country. The 49th lowest in the number of people we send to prison. But we are in the top 5 of people on probation in the country. So if you're going to have people out, you need to make certain that you provide adequate resources to make certain that you don't end up simply sending them to prison, but they actually have access to resources and supervision. We went a long ways to make certain that we are taking care of victims of crime. We have crime prevention grants, sexual assault grants. We have grants to make certain that well, right now we're going to do a report to make certain that rape kits are, we know what the assessment is of rape kits that are unanalyzed. We funded the BCA in order to make certain that they can actually do the test. Many of you know that we have a program that deals with folks who prey upon our children, internet crimes against children. We made certain that the BCA had the resources that they requested to make certain that we're doing the best we can by Minnesota children to make certain that they can investigate those crimes as well as capture those who are preying upon our families. So members, there are a few pieces that are missing, but for the most part, everything that's been included in this bill has been very bipartisan. It was a pleasure to work with Representative Cornish this session, both as the chair and as the member of the conference committee, as well as the other members of the conference committee. I signed the conference report, and I would encourage you to vote yes.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, first I'd like to ask for a roll call.
There being 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
I'm going to speak to the DFL side here for a while. I already got the votes over here, but I want to work on you folks. Last time we had this here, we had quite a few votes for it. But what I'd like to do is ask you a question. Like Representative Dean, I want to ask you to yield, but you came down to my committee on this bill and you asked me to make two exceptions. One is I didn't want any public speaking, and you asked if somebody could, and I let them do that. And then we hadn't anything in the bill or hadn't even considered it, and you asked for money to be put in it, and we did that. And then afterwards you voted against the bill, but I still kept your money in there. Now you can always do that, but the problem is you took a stand on no voting or no felony voters, and you came up to me and told me that. Now some of you have been asked to do the same thing. There's been people that filtered among you. I've heard from a couple of you who'd asked you to take a stand today and vote no because of felon voting. But don't do that. Don't choose this bill to make that stand. Rather make your stand on the money we put in to keep from getting to be felons. You folks had asked me to put in there the youth intervention, the YIPA money, and I did. And you said that this would keep people from getting into trouble, and the challenge programs and the other things that are in here. So there's people to keep you from getting into trouble, and then there's some rehabilitation too, and crime victim services, something for everybody. If you commit the crime or rehabilitate you from crime or care for the person that is a victim of the crime. So make your stand today and vote green. Don't just take a stand and vote no on a very good bill with one of the more generous targets of all the areas just for felon voting. It was 55-9 over there. I'd like to have even a better percentage over here if you would, please. So please vote green.
There being no further discussion or roll call being requested, the clerk will take the roll on the motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate File 878.
Yep.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 108 ayes and 23 nays, the motion prevails, and the chief clerk will give the bill, the Commerce Committee report its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 878, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Members, any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk, sorry. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Cornish yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Representative Cornish. I see that the House provision relating to impersonating a military officer is not in the Conference Committee report. Can you tell us about that?
Chair Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Thiessen, yes, it's always difficult dealing with the Senate with the amount of speculation they give, and they even admitted that when we were doing this that they don't ever have anything go without changing it somehow, and they were worried that the broad definition would include people, homeless people, or somebody that claimed to be a veteran and get somebody in trouble that wasn't, and so that they wouldn't take the language.
Minority Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Cornish would yield for another question.
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Yeah, I also see that provisions related to increased penalties for reckless driving were not included in the final committee report. Can you talk to us about that?
Chair Cornish.
That was another one that they just couldn't get by. And we tried actually everything that was in ours for the House position very strongly. But when you're dealing with the Senate, I think even Representative Hillstrom will tell you, anything with an increased penalty or an enhancement or a fine is something, unless they come up with the idea, is really difficult, and we lost that one too.
Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Chair Cornish would yield for another question.
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I know that there was some Senate provisions related to juvenile justice in the bill, and some related to sentencing that I know are quite controversial and are going to need a lot more time and thought about. But there was a provision about juveniles not being forced to wear restraints in court, which seems like a fairly reasonable provision to me. And I was just wondering why what the House resistance to that provision was.
Chair Cornish.
Representative Thiessen, that's the Senate provision, I think, and well, personally, I give you my feeling on it from my time in law enforcement. Some of the most violent crimes are committed are by juveniles, and they're just as big a threat as adults, and I never have really liked the idea of having somebody out of restraints, especially with the crimes that have been committed in transport, and so that was really a tough one for us. And I read all the material and the studies behind it about how they feel when they are restrained and how they might be traumatized. But most jails now, after the people of breaking windows out of squad cars and boogieing down the street, have, and transport officials, even if they're private, has use of restraints. It was just too far of a stretch to go for us for a safety issue. And I think that the County Attorney Association opposed it.
Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Zerwas yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a provision that I didn't notice on the way out, but a provision to lower prejudgment interest on damages on verdicts. That was your provision from 10% to 4%. Can you talk to me about that provision? What was motivating that? So basically, victims are going to be getting less money as a result of that provision, if I'm not mistaken.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Zerwas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Minority Leader Thiessen. The prejudgment interest change was to help Minnesota come back into conformity with many other states. I think if I remember right, I don't have my notes in front of me, I believe it was over 24 states that have in recent years lowered their judgment interest rates. In committee, there was concern about after a judgment had come forward and a delay in payment when that money was owed from a judgment, and the idea that if there was the high interest rate, that post-judgment was an incentive to pay. And so as a compromise in committee, I had an amendment that looked at just the pre-judgment portion, the portion from when the individual was notified they were going to be sued until the judgment came forward. My understanding is in conference committee, breaking news, the Senate had no interest in that, and it was not incorporated.
Leader Thiessen.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Mr.
To the bill author, Representative Cornish.
I didn't know if there was any other question, Mr. Speaker. Representative Thiessen, I misspoke in that we had two provisions. One was Representative Swedinsky's that we lost in criminal vehicular homicide or criminal vehicular operation CVO enhancements that we lost, but the reckless driving, if that's the term you use, that's still in there. So I was just on the wrong one. And in my item, if I'm the last one, vote green.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 116 ayes and 15 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and is title agreed to.